Mom, does Daddy hate us?
No, baby, Daddy doesn't hate us. Daddy loves you so much.
Rain tapped softly against the glass walls of the Seoul penthouse, the kind of rain that felt personal, like it knew something was wrong and had come to bear witness. Little Mia sat cross-legged by the front door, her small back pressed against the cool marble wall, her eyes fixed on the elevator doors across the hallway. In her lap, she held a drawing she had made that afternoon. 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. The tallest one had a suit and a big smile. The one in the middle wore a colorful dress. The smallest one had pigtails and a heart above her head. She had worked on it for 2 hours. The clock on the wall read 11:57 p.m. Naomi stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her daughter wait. She had already warmed the food twice. She had already told Mia, twice, that Daddy was probably just stuck in a meeting. She had already smoothed Mia's hair and kissed her forehead and said, "He's coming, baby." And each time, Mia had nodded with the terrifying faith that only children possess, the kind that hasn't yet learned to protect itself. Naomi's tea had gone cold. She didn't drink it anyway. At 11:59 p.m., the elevator doors opened. Kang Min-jae walked in. Sharp charcoal suit, silver cufflinks catching the light, his phone pressed against his ear. He was smiling. Not the polite, tired smile of a man returning home after a long day. A real smile. Bright eyes, relaxed jaw. A low laugh escaping his lips as he said into the phone, "No, no. Tell her I'll arrange everything. Yes. It'll be perfect." Mia scrambled to her feet so fast, she almost dropped the drawing. "Daddy!" She ran toward him, the paper clutched in both hands, her little feet slapping against the marble floor. "Daddy, look what I made! Look! That's you! And that's Mommy! And that's me! And we're all holding—" Kang Min-jae walked past her, not around her. Past her! His eyes never left his phone screen. He was already typing something, still faintly smiling, and he disappeared down the hallway toward his home office without a single word. The door clicked shut behind him. Mia stood in the middle of the living room. The drawing hung loosely from her fingers. The penthouse was so quiet that Naomi could hear the rain again. Slowly, Mia turned around. Her large brown eyes found her mother's face across the room, searching it the way children do when they need an adult to explain something that doesn't make sense, something that hurts in a place they don't yet have a name for. "Mom," Mia said quietly, "does Dad hate us?" The question landed like a stone dropped in still water. Naomi's throat closed. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For 3 full seconds, she stood completely still, a woman holding herself together through sheer will. And then she crossed the room and gathered her daughter into her arms, pressing the small, warm body against her chest, burying her face in those pigtails. "No, baby," she whispered. "He doesn't hate us." But even as she said it, even as she held her daughter and rocked her gently in the middle of that cold, beautiful penthouse, Naomi Adeyemi knew something had fractured tonight that she could not repair with words. She had been holding fractures together for a very long time. Naomi had come to Seoul 6 years ago, not chasing a man, but loving one. She had met Kang Min-jae at a trade conference in London, where he was the keynote speaker, and she was a junior brand consultant from Lagos, with fire in her eyes and a business plan tucked under her arm. He had walked past the crowd and found her somehow, the way magnetic things find each other. And within 20 minutes of conversation, he had said, "You see the world differently. I like that." She had laughed and said, "Most people find it inconvenient." He had smiled the kind of smile that rearranged something in her chest. They were married 14 months later. Back then, Min-jae had been different, or perhaps she had simply seen a different side of him, the side he only showed when he was trying to win something. He had been present, curious about her. He used to call her in the middle of his workday just to say, "I was thinking about something you said last week." He used to sit on the kitchen counter while she cooked and ask her questions about her childhood in Ibadan, about her mother's fabric shop, about the patterns she used to trace with her fingers as a little girl. He used to look at her like she was the most interesting thing in any room. Then the company expanded. Then Mia was born. Then the work became everything, and the everything became work, and Naomi gradually became part of the furniture of his life. Elegant, present, unnoticed. She told herself it was a phase. She told herself every marriage had seasons. She told herself that a man building an empire needed patience from the people who loved him. She had been patient for 4 years, and still, somehow, it was never enough. Dinner was the clearest proof of what their marriage had become. The table was always set for 3. Naomi made sure of that, because she believed in the ritual of it, in the idea that a family ate together, and that this mattered. Mia would sit in her chair and eat her rice and tell long, breathless stories about school, about a boy named Jiho who ate paste, about the song they learned in music class, about the butterfly she had seen on the playground that had wings like stained glass. Naomi listened to every word. She asked follow-up questions. She laughed in the right places. Minjae scrolled through his phone. One evening, Naomi had set her fork down and said, very carefully, "Minjae, Mia is talking to you." He had looked up. "Hmm? Yes, I'm listening." What did she just say? A pause. She said, something about school. Mia had looked at her father with a complicated expression for a 6-year-old, something between disappointment and the desperate desire not to be disappointed. And then she had quietly gone back to her rice. That night, after Mia was asleep, Naomi had stood in the doorway of his office and said, "She notices, you know. Children notice everything." Minjae had looked up from his laptop with the expression of a man being interrupted from something important. "I provide everything for this family, Naomi. She has the best school, the best—" "She doesn't want things, Minjae. She wants you. I'm doing this for her. She doesn't know that. She's 6. All she knows is that you walk past her." He had looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, but with the practiced patience of someone who had already decided the conversation wasn't worth continuing, and then he had turned back to his screen. "I'll make it up to her on the weekend," he said. The weekend came. He was in Tokyo. It was a Tuesday morning when Naomi saw the message. She hadn't been snooping. She had never been that kind of wife, had always believed that trust was the floor of a marriage, not the ceiling. Minjae had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to shower, and it had lit up while she was standing right there refilling her coffee. And because humans are not made of stone, and the screen was facing up, she saw it before she could look away. "I missed last night." Sujin Naomi put the coffee down. She stood very still. She read it again. Then she picked up her own phone, walked to the window, and stood looking out at Seoul spread below her. All those lives stacked on top of each other. All those people carrying their private griefs through the streets. And she breathed. In. Out. In. Out. She didn't cry. She didn't confront him. She simply filed it away in the part of herself that she had been quietly building walls around for years. And when Minjae came back into the kitchen in his suit, she handed him his coffee and said, "Mia needs you to sign her school form before you leave." He signed it without looking at it and was out the door in 90 seconds. Naomi stood in the kitchen alone. Sujin. She knew the name. Choi Soo-jin. Minjae's first love. The woman he had dated before his family's expectations and corporate ambitions had pulled him in a different direction. She was the kind of beautiful that photographed well, refined in the way of women who had been trained since childhood to occupy space gracefully, to smile precisely, to never say the wrong thing in public, and say exactly the right thing in private. She still moved in the same elite circles. Naomi had met her 3 times at events, and each time, Soo-jin had been perfectly warm, perfectly polished, perfectly harmless seeming. And all 3 times, Naomi had felt something cold in the air between them that she hadn't been able to name. Now she had a name for it. The nights Min-jae didn't come home became more frequent. First once a week, a late work emergency, a client dinner that ran long. Then twice. Then he stopped offering explanations at all, and Naomi stopped asking, because she already knew, and asking would only make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. Mia noticed. Children always notice. "Mommy, where did Daddy sleep last night?" she asked one morning over breakfast, stirring her porridge without eating it. "He had to stay near the office, baby. Very busy at work." "He's always busy." Mia looked at her spoon. "Jiho's dad takes him to the park on Saturdays. Does Daddy like parks?" "Of course he does." "Then why doesn't he take me?" Naomi reached across the table and covered her daughter's small hand with her own. "I'll talk to him, okay? I'll ask him to take you to the park." "You always say that." It was said without malice. That was the thing about Mia. She didn't weaponize her pain. She just stated it plainly, the way children do when they haven't yet learned to soften their truths for the comfort of adults. And that honesty, that clean, unsentimental accuracy, was somehow more devastating than any accusation. That evening, Naomi did try. Min-jae had come home briefly to change for a dinner she was no longer invited to, and she had stood in the doorway of their bedroom and said, "Mia asked why you don't take her to the park." "I'll take her when things quiet down at the office." "Min-jae." She kept her voice level. "When is that going to be? She's growing up. She's going to stop asking." "I'll take her, Naomi. I said I will." He adjusted his tie in the mirror, checked his cufflinks, and then looked at her reflection. "Is there anything else?" She looked at the man in the mirror, at the clean lines of his face, the composed posture, the careful distance in his eyes when he looked at her. She thought about everything she wanted to say, about Soo-jin, about the empty side of the bed, about the child who waited by the door every night. "No," she said. "There's nothing else." He left. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands for a long time. The phone call happened on a Thursday. Naomi had been in the hallway, walking toward the home office to retrieve a document she needed for a freelance project, when she heard Min-jae's voice through the door. Low, warm, unhurried, nothing like the clipped efficiency she had grown used to. "I know it's complicated," he was saying, "but you know it's always been you. You know that. I never stopped. Even when I tried to. I never stopped." Naomi's hand froze over the door handle. "Don't say that," he continued, and he was almost laughing. That same bright, relaxed laugh she had heard him use on the phone the night he walked past Mia. "I'm not going anywhere this time, I promise you. I know what I want now." She stood there. The hallway was cold. She couldn't feel her feet. She didn't hear the rest. She turned around, walked back to the living room, sat down on the couch, and pressed her hands flat against her knees to stop them from shaking. The room looked exactly the same as it always did. The art on the walls, the flowers she had arranged that morning, the framed photograph of herself and Min-jae on their wedding day. Laughing at something just out of frame, so visibly, recklessly happy. She stared at that photograph for a long time. Then she looked away. That night, Mia woke from a bad dream and came padding into the living room where Naomi was still sitting in the dark. She climbed into her mother's lap, still half asleep, and pressed her face against Naomi's shoulder. "I dreamed Daddy went away," she murmured, "and didn't come back." Naomi held her tighter. Mommy? Yes, baby. Why doesn't Daddy love us like before? There it was again. Not does Dad hate us this time, but something worse. The before. The acknowledgement that there had been a before. That Mia remembered it, however dimly, and could feel the difference between then and now. Naomi closed her eyes. She could have said what she always said. He loves us, baby. He's just tired. He's just busy. Things will get better. She had said those words so many times they had become smooth and hollow, like stones worn down by water. She could have said them again. Instead, she pressed her lips to the top of Mia's head and whispered, I love you more than everything. Do you know that? I know, Mia said. I love you more than everything, too. That's all we need, okay? That's enough. Mia fell back asleep in her arms. Naomi did not sleep at all. She sat in the dark, listening to the rain, and somewhere in those quiet hours, something inside her stopped. Not broke. Stopped. Like a clock that has been wound too many times and simply goes still. And in that stillness, with her daughter's warm weight in her arms and the empty bedroom behind her, and the sound of soul carrying on indifferently outside the glass, she made a decision. No more waiting. She did not shout. She did not confront. She did not lay her pain at his feet and beg him to look at it. Naomi Adeyemi had more dignity than that. She called a lawyer the next morning while Mia was at school. She was calm and precise on the phone. She wanted to understand the process, the timelines, what it would mean for Mia, what she was entitled to, what she was willing to ask for, what she was willing to walk away from. The lawyer asked if she was sure, and she said, I've been sure for a long time. I just needed to catch up with what I already knew. She spent the next 3 days quietly, methodically, without a single tear, preparing. She arranged an apartment. She called her sister in Lagos, who said, finally, and then cried in a way Naomi had no energy left to cry. She packed the things that were hers, and Mia's, not vindictively, not theatrically, just practically. And she folded them into suitcases with the same focused calm she had brought to everything since that night on the couch. On the 4th day, she picked Mia up from school. Mia knew something was happening. She could feel the density of the air around her mother, the charged stillness of it, and she sat in the back seat of the car and watched Naomi's face in the rearview mirror as they drove back toward the penthouse one last time. Mommy, she said finally, are we going on a trip? In a way, Naomi said. When they got home, Naomi walked through each room one last time. She touched the kitchen counter where she had read that message. She stood at the window where she had stood afterward, looking out at the city. She looked at the dining table, set for 3, waiting for a man who hadn't sat there with intention in 2 years. She walked to the bedroom and looked at his side of the bed, untouched, cold, crisp. I've been alone this whole time, she said aloud to no one. It wasn't said with anger. It was said the way you say the thing you have known for a long time once you finally allow yourself to say it. Like naming a country you have been living in without a map. She placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table, neat and flat, with a pen beside them. Then she picked up her suitcase. Mia was standing in the hallway, her small backpack on her shoulders, looking up at her mother with those enormous perceptive eyes. Are we leaving Daddy? She asked. Naomi crouched down to her level and looked into her face, her daughter's face, this beautiful, complicated, precious face that trusted her completely. And she said steadily, we're going somewhere. We won't have to wait anymore. Mia considered this. Then she nodded. They walked out of the penthouse together. The elevator doors closed behind them. No goodbye, no scene, no backward look. Minjae came home late that night, later than usual. He was in a light mood. Soo-jin had been particularly warm. The evening had gone well. He had a meeting in the morning and a full week of momentum behind him. He set his phone on the counter, loosened his tie, and moved toward the kitchen for water. He saw the papers. He stopped. He picked them up. He read them once, then set them back down on the counter. He looked around the kitchen, at the empty counter, the cold stove, the absence of the sound he had gotten so used to ignoring. Then he walked through the apartment, the hallway, Mia's room, their bedroom, empty. He stood in the middle of the living room, looked at the divorce papers, looked at the window. "She'll come back," he said. Not to anyone, just to the room, just to the idea of it. The idea that this was not irreversible, that it was emotion, that she was making a point and would come back once she'd made it. He went back to his room. He slept. He did not call. 6 years is a long time when you're starting from nothing. Naomi knew nothing about running a business when she started. She knew textiles, had grown up in her mother's fabric shop, absorbing color and pattern, and the physics of cloth the way other children absorbed nursery rhymes. She knew the African luxury market had a story that the world hadn't heard properly yet. She knew there was something in her that needed to be built, that had always needed to be built, and that for years she had been building it quietly in the margins of someone else's life. Now she had the center. The first year was hard in the specific, unglamorous way that first years always are. She rented a small apartment in Ibadan, back in the city where she had grown up, where her mother still had the fabric shop, where Mia could have her grandmother's cooking and the sound of familiar voices. She converted the second bedroom into a workspace, and she worked every night after Mia fell asleep, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, researching and designing and reaching out to people, and getting told no, and following up and getting told no again. She was rejected by 11 investors in the first 8 months. 11. The 12th meeting, she sat across from a woman who ran one of West Africa's most respected venture firms, and the woman said, "I've heard about your rejections. Why do you think they all said no?" Naomi said, "Because I was presenting it like a fashion brand. It's not a fashion brand. It's a cultural statement. There's nothing else in the global luxury market telling this story with this level of craft. I was too polite about what I was building. I should have walked in like I owned the category." The woman looked at her for a long moment. "That," she said, "is a correct analysis." She got the funding. The brand, Naomi A, launched quietly, beautifully, with a campaign that felt more like a visual poem than an advertisement. African textiles and silhouettes, global luxury quality, a story about identity and elegance and the audacity of women who build themselves from scratch. The campaign was shared 8,000 times in the first 48 hours. It was not an overnight success. Nothing real is. It was a slow burn, and then a tipping point. One celebrity wear, one major editorial, one collaboration that cracked open the European market. And then suddenly, Naomi A was not a small brand from West Africa, but a name that commanded rooms. Mia grew up watching her mother work. She saw the late nights and the rejection letters and the days her mother made a cup of tea and sat at the desk and stared at the wall for 10 minutes before going back to the keyboard. She saw the victories too, the first major order, the first store to carry the line, the day the magazine called and asked for a cover shoot. She saw what it looked like to build something from nothing, and it entered her the way formative things enter children. Deep, permanent, wordless. By the time Mia was 12, she no longer asked about her father. Not because it didn't matter, but because she had learned that some doors stay closed, and that the life on your side of the door is still worth living fully. Kang Min Joy, in those same 6 years, lived the specific ruin of a man who had everything and chose badly. Choi Soo-jin was everything he had remembered. Beautiful, sophisticated, completely at home in his world. For the first year, she was perfect. Present in the way Naomi had once been, engaged, attentive, knowing exactly what to say and when to say it. He had felt vindicated. He had felt that this was what he had been missing, what had made him restless, what had made the marriage feel like a responsibility instead of a choice. But Soo-jin had an instinct for useful things, and what she found useful, she used. She began attending his business meetings, not invited, but present, and Min-jae found he didn't mind, because she was smooth and charming and seemed to add something to the room. She offered opinions on deals. She had access to his networks. She introduced him to people who offered opportunities that seemed good until they didn't. The first bad deal cost him credibility. The second cost him a partnership he had spent 3 years building. The third, a real estate investment Soo-jin had pressed him toward, with a business associate she had been careful not to seem too close to, cost him a significant portion of the company's liquid assets and triggered an investor panic that took 6 months to even partially contain. Through all of it, his inner circle, the people who had been with the company long enough to have opinions, tried to warn him. His CFO put the numbers on paper in unmistakable language. His board raised concerns twice. Each time Min-jae listened and dismissed and went home to Soo-jin, who had a way of reframing every warning into an attack on his judgment, every concern into jealousy or disloyalty. He had always known his own mind. He had built an empire on trusting his instincts. He had stopped trusting his instincts the moment he started trusting hers. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was a long, grinding erosion. Stock value declining, board confidence thinning, media coverage shifting from admiring to cautious to openly critical. The company didn't fall. It bent. It became a lesser version of itself. And through the bending, Min-jae became a lesser version of himself. The morning the quarterly results showed the third consecutive decline, Soo-jin came into the living room, where he sat at his desk with the reports spread in front of him, and she looked at him. Really looked at him, in a way she hadn't in some time. And she said, "You need to step back." "Step back from my own company? You're dragging it down." The words hit him like cold water. He turned to look at her, and for the first time in years, he looked without the filter of what he had wanted her to be, without the golden light he had cast on her for so long. He looked at her the way you finally look at something when you're ready to see it. She was already looking toward the door. "You're not the man you used to be," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was something worse. It was accurate and efficient, the voice of a woman completing a transaction. "And I can't keep doing this." She left that afternoon. Her things were gone by evening. Min-jae sat alone in a penthouse that was slightly less large than the one he'd shared with Naomi, looking at a company that was slightly less great than the one he'd built before Soo-jin. And he understood, with the terrible clarity that only arrives when there is no longer anything to hide behind, exactly what he had done. He had traded something real for something beautiful. He had traded love for the performance of love. And now, he had neither. It was in the silence of those weeks, in the emptiness of the apartment, that Min-jae found himself opening drawers he hadn't opened in years. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe something to do with his hands. Maybe something to remind him who he was before the decisions that had unmade him. He found it in the back of a desk drawer, a child's drawing on folded paper, slightly worn at the creases, the colors bright and simple and sincere. 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. The tallest one wore a suit. The one in the middle had a colorful dress. The smallest one had pigtails and a heart above her head. He sat at the desk for a very long time. He didn't remember taking it with him when he left the penthouse. Maybe it had been in a box of his things, packed efficiently and without sentiment, by a woman who had once loved him and had found it within herself to simply stop. Maybe he had slipped it into a pocket without knowing why. He looked at the drawing and he thought about the night Mia had tried to show it to him. He had walked past her. He hadn't even seen it. The television was on across the room, a business channel, left running because silence had become too honest. A presenter's voice floated across, which brings us to this week's top story. Naomi A., the luxury lifestyle and fashion brand founded by Nigerian entrepreneur Naomi Adeyemi, has just announced a global expansion deal that analysts are calling one of the most significant in the African luxury sector in a decade. Adeyemi, often cited as one of the most powerful self-made businesswomen in the world today. Minjay looked up. On the television screen, Naomi stood at a podium. She wore a gown from her own collection. Deep emerald, architectural shoulders, radiant. Beside her on the stage, 12-year-old Mia sat in the front row, composed and beautiful, and watching her mother with an expression of complete, unconditional pride. Minjay looked at the screen. He looked at the drawing in his hand. He looked at the screen again. For a long time, he didn't move. The invitation to the Global Luxury Business Gala was the kind that people kept. Heavy cream cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, the names of the world's most consequential brands, and the people who had built them. It was held in a converted palace in Paris, chandeliers that had been watching, history for 3 centuries, marble floors that reflected the lights back upward, a room full of people who had earned the right to be there through decades of work. Naomi Adeyemi arrived at 8:14 p.m. She did not arrive quietly. The room registered her before she was fully in it. Something shifted in the air, the specific shift that happens when someone genuinely powerful walks into a space. She wore ivory this time, an original piece from the new Naomi A. collection, and she walked with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had nothing left to prove and simply chose, from abundance, to be here. Mia was beside her, 12 years old, tall for her age, wearing a simpler version of her mother's aesthetic. Clean lines, one gold earring, and her grandmother's eyes. She walked the way she had learned from watching her mother, calmly, fully present, entirely herself. Naomi was talking to a French designer she had long admired, laughing at something he said, when she heard a familiar stillness somewhere to her left. She turned. Kong Minjai stood 20 feet away. He was still well dressed. He had always known how to occupy a suit, but there was something different about him, a quality she couldn't name immediately, and then she could. He looked like a man who had been cracked open and hadn't yet figured out how to close again. He was looking at her. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then turned back to her conversation. She had been prepared for this. She had known the gala would have him. His company was still on the guest list even in decline. The name still carried weight. She had known, and she had chosen to come anyway, because she had earned her place in this room, and she was not going to rearrange her life around his presence. Not anymore. She felt him approaching before she saw him. He moved through the room slowly, and the crowd parted for him not out of deference, but because he was moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who knows they have no right to be welcomed. Naomi. His voice was lower than she remembered. She turned to face him. Minjay. He looked at her. Really looked. The way people look when they've spent a long time carrying the image of someone, and then find that the real person has grown past the image. You look. He stopped himself. He seemed to understand that aesthetic observation had no place here. I've been following the company. What you've built is extraordinary. Thank you. A pause, heavy with everything that hadn't been said for 6 years. Naomi, Dad? They both turned. Mia stood slightly behind and to the right of her mother, looking at Kang Min-jae with an expression that was careful and measured and not at all childlike in its control, except that children shouldn't need that kind of control, and the fact that this one did set everything. Min-jae's face changed. He looked at his daughter, and something in him broke in a way that was visible. A visible fracture across his composure, a man confronting the cost of his choices in the clearest possible form. She was 12. She was poised and beautiful, and she was looking at him with eyes that held no hostility and no warmth, only the particular sadness of someone who had learned not to expect. "Mia," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the single syllable. He took a step toward her. "I'm your father. I know I know who you are," she said. Not rudely, just plainly, the way Mia had always stated things, with that clean, unsentimental accuracy that her mother had once called devastating. "I've thought about this moment," she continued, and her eyes were calm and full at the same time. "I thought about what I would say." "Mia, are you going to leave again?" she asked. The question fell into the space between them. Min-jae's mouth opened. Nothing came out, because there was no good answer. There was no answer that undid the years of absence, the drawings ignored, the bedtimes missed, the school forms signed without looking, the phone calls from rooms away, the nights Maya had sat by the door. There was no answer that addressed the question she was really asking, which was not logistical, but existential. Can I trust you? Are you safe? If I let you in, will it happen again? He could not promise it would not. He had no track record to offer. He had only remorse and the terrible belated understanding of what he had thrown away, and neither of those things was enough. Not here. Not for this. Naomi watched her daughter. She watched the steadiness in those 12-year-old eyes, and she felt a complicated grief. Grief that her child had needed to grow that steadiness at all, that life had made it necessary, and also a fierce protective pride in the person Mia had become. Then she stepped forward. Not aggressively, just forward, closing the distance between herself and this moment that she had been moving toward for 6 years without knowing it. "Min-jae," she said. He looked at her. "We waited for you," she said. "Every night. Mia waited at the door. I waited in the kitchen. We kept the food warm and we kept faith.